So last week I made a video about installing a Shimano CUES front derailleur, setting up friction shifting to use with my wide range double setup. I ran into a few problems. One, there not being a shim for a 28.6 tube, but probably the most significant problem was that the shifters seemed to require way too much force to actually use well. At first, I had attributed that to the new cable pull, but then as many people pointed out, that the increase in cable pull should actually make it somewhat easier to shift. A couple people pointed out the less than optimal routing I have on this bike for the front derailleur. And I had suspected that because the exit angle of the cable coming from the bottom bracket wasn't doing great. It was coming out at a really acute angle and forcing this really tight bend. So a lot of friction in the system. Before we get into what I ended up doing and how that solved the problem, I thought I would address some of the other suggestions that different people had about how I could fix this. But first off, if you're not familiar with the Cave of Bad Ideas, this is a judgment-free zone. We get to experiment, we get to be wrong, in the greater service of discovering things. All that to say is that I'm not pretending to be a professional mechanic. I'm fudging through this just like some of you guys are, but I'm open to learning. This is all about experimentation, thinking outside the box. One of the first comments that came up is, why do this at all? Isn't CUES just a mountain bike group set? Of course, it wouldn't work in a road configuration. Currently, CUES is only available for flat bar bikes, but in the launch a few months ago, it was all but confirmed that CUES would also trickle into the road side of things. And so I wanted to get a little bit ahead of the curve before the drop bar shifters came out, and wanted to see how it plays well with available group sets out there right now. So hence this experimentation with a supposed mountain bike only group set on a roadish/gravel setup. And in that process, we discovered a couple things. In the previous video, my version of the derailleur did not shim down to 28.6. I know that Rivendell had similar issues, that they were going to have to source shims for their frame, so not an isolated incident, and something that they'll definitely have to address if this does indeed become the front derailleur for a road/gravel setup. Another interesting suggestion was to mount a cable stop somewhere on the down tube, then run a length of bare cable to the bottom bracket and redirect it into the front derailleur. I didn't do that because I didn't have the parts, I didn't have the cable stop. If you're gonna do something like that, you'll need to get a plastic bottom bracket cable guide of some sort, something like this Problem Solvers one, or some equivalent to, again, redirect that bare cable up towards the front derailleur. I had none of those parts. I was just trying to do this video quick and dirty. And lastly, in all this experimentation, it does seem like the probably easiest way to execute something like this with the CUES front derailleur is to not use this version of the front derailleur, but to use the version where the cable loads into the front. Check out the Bridge Club series by Ottawa Bike, apparently Ottawa, Kansas. That's totally viable. It would avoid kind of any excessive bends or weird kinks that one would run into going with a down pull front derailleur. The reason I didn't do that was I didn't have spare housing to play with. I didn't want to cut the housing short, have it not work, then have to run to a bike shop and get more housing. Just trying to be cheap, but that is a total viable option. Having set it up down pull, I think in the future, or if I were to do something like this again, I would definitely look more seriously at the forward cable pull version of this front derailleur. Probably the only caveat of that whole thing is that it just looks kind of weird and ugly to have the housing pop out of the front derailleur and just zip tied to the down tube. So aesthetics aside, it should work well. But for me, coming mostly from road and gravel bikes, it hurts the eyes. So what did I do to fix the problem? Well, let's switch to the action/probe cam and see how it works. So the main issue was with the cable stop here. I had it more in the center. And what that was doing was having the cable from here come out at a really sharp angle and then wrap around to the cable cinch bolt. What I ended up doing to relieve a lot of the tension was just to lower this as much as possible. So this is slammed to the bottom bracket and then rotating it off to the side. It's still not great. Like, the offset of the front derailleur is really rearward, so the cable does have to go back before wrapping around. But at least this way, it's not coming off at an acute angle to the side before going around. It's a little bit straighter path along the cable guides. In terms of what it looks like when it's shifting, this is the Barcon position when it's in its highest gear. Shift it down. That is the position when it's in the smaller chainring. And there you go. Trimming it a little bit so that the derailleur doesn't hit the crank, but really easy to do. So after making these modifications, it really relieved the friction in the system, and now it shifts great. So I take back what I said in the previous video. It works fine. I personally don't think the throw of the Barcon is excessive. I know that the folks over at Rivendell weren't a fan of that. To me, it's within the usable range. I don't know about flat bar setups and friction shifting, but in terms of a Barcon on a road or gravel style bike, not an issue. So I totally recommend it. Take back what I said about the issues with the Shimano front derailleur. You do have to navigate around the routing or just, again, use the front cable loading version of this front derailleur. So mea culpa if I shared some bad information. You know, again, I'm a tinkerer just like you guys, not a professional mechanic. Cave of bad ideas and not the cave of perfect installations. If you guys dig this content, don't forget to subscribe or consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. That's how we're able to afford all these parts to play with and continue to make these hacky videos. If that's too much commitment, I get it. Pick up some stickers or a shirt at the merch store. And as always, keep the supple side down.